Michaela won't be here.
Can remind members are obliged to declare any relevant financial or interest at each committee meeting as applicable. Draft minutes, pages 5 to 10. Members can enter an accurate record. Agreed. Just in terms of matters arising, members, I'm sure members would have seen the Spotlight programme this week in regard to the NAMA deal and the sale of the Project Eagle portfolio. I think it was quite shocking and I think it was quite damning of Mr Frank Cushnahan and others, and it's particularly timely given the fact that we are due to sign off on our own inquiry next week, so I think it clearly will have an effect on that. And I think that whereas we were at a final drafting stage, I think if members have any suggestions for amendments to that, if they could bring them forward sometime this week. But just, I mean, going over what was said on the programme, it was quite clear that after PIMCO had failed to become the successful bidder, it's clear to me from what Mr Cushnahan said, the next stage was to get the next one on the pitch in regard to Cerberus. I think it's quite damning and actually endorses or certainly backs up the suspicions that we had that there was corruption involved here, and indeed Mr John Miskelly, who was due to come before the committee, has said that he realised, in view of the continual suppression of his complaints to financial institutions, that the only way to expose the financial misconduct and their corrupt dealings was to make a statement to Spotlight, and he has also sent records to the US Securities and Exchange Commission. So this is serious stuff, and I think as well as that, the committee has already said, or certainly members of the committee have already said, that after PIMCO were unsuccessful and after NAMA and the Department of Finance became aware of Mr Cushnahan's involvement in that process, the process should have been halted before the deal was done with Cerberus. So I think points around the failings of the Irish Government and failings by NAMA should be included in a report as well. And certainly I do realise that we have only 2 weeks left and we shall conclude on this report, but I think it is only right and proper that we write to those who were recorded in the filming to ask them to come forward in the next 2 weeks to provide an explanation of what exactly they were doing. Frank Cushnahan has dodged this committee for months and months and months. Now we can see why, and I think that he should come before the committee and answer the questions that the public have. There were others obviously in that recording. I am aware that Mr Miskelly is currently very unwell, so I can understand if he is not able to make the meeting, but certainly the other parties involved should be given an opportunity to come forward and state their case, because I am concerned that a report could be a little bit incomplete if you do not take into account the developments in recent days.
Chair, sorry, do you want to? Well, Chair, I think there's three points that spring to mind from the programme. First is that, as I said in some of the points that I submitted to the review, the way in which Mr Cushnahan was appointed was fraught, was unwise, no advice sought, no process, no criteria, and I've said very strongly in this report that we need to make sure that that doesn't happen again. Now, some people say we didn't make the appointment, but we more or less made it a fait accompli, for one. Number two, some of us have said for some time it's quite clear that Mr Cushnahan's involvement was that of a fixer right through following PIMCO on to Cerberus, and of course it's also a fact that Mr Cushnahan also met Fortress, so he was acting as a fixer through it. But thirdly, a point which is more worrying, which hasn't come up here before, is the suggestion that in the heart of NAMA there was a person who was liaising with or in contact with Mr Cushnan. That person was named in the programme as Ronnie Hanna. That's what Mick Wallace said in the Dial. And that's another whole dimension of concern and intrigue added on to our inquiry. So, Chair, I think for those 3 reasons, it is correct that we try and follow up some of the leads, I suppose, from this programme.
Okay.
Yes, Chair, I don't disagree with either of the last 2 speakers in that. I'm still specific catching up with the terms of reference of the work of this committee and also what's going to be possible within the mandate. And I think the advice the committee received and the advice that some of the people called received about an inability to speak to us while the investigations were ongoing is fairly robust, and we'll get a bit of an update on where they're going. But I think the programme did just blow the lid on it even further, and there's no way that we can proceed without these all of the tales of the story being properly explored, and I don't think there's going to be any public confidence until that happens. So we do have a very short period of time before the end of the mandate, but I think it's fair to say the report wouldn't be complete if we didn't. Those people who don't have a compelling legal reason not to come to us weren't brought forward, including people within the executive who haven't to date come to the committee, and I personally don't understand why that is at the moment, and specifically whether it's this committee or another body does need to audit some of the activities of Mr Cushnan outside and inside government as well. I believe some of his roles that more closely even than the Housing Executive and the Harbour Commissioner and of other things. So I think whatever we are in a position to do over the next 2 weeks to make the report as meaningful as it can be, but I think it has probably gone beyond the remit and the terms of this committee, and I think somebody that can compel all of those witnesses north and south is going to be required.
I mean, I think it's worth saying as well that the programme drew to a large extent on the work of the committee, and I think it is an endorsement of the committee's work over the past number of months, that many of the leads and much of the detail within Spotlight was drawn upon the very good work that the committee has done. But I think as well it is, I mean, we had senior ministers of the executive at that time, or at a particular time, the former finance minister and the former first minister, come here and stand over the integrity of Mr Cushnan. So I think those 2 ministers will be particularly embarrassed, to put it mildly, at the video that was shown on television the other night. So I do think that we need to correspond with some of those parties to give them the opportunity to come to the committee or to write to the committee over the next couple of weeks, because I think the public will expect us to follow through on some of the allegations that were made. So there were a number of parties named: Ronnie Hanna, Gareth Robinson, and there was another couple. Martina, can you remember the other party at the meeting?
A man called David Gray, an accountant whose name hadn't come up previously, and I don't know who he is or what his connection to this story is. Yeah.
So I think it's important to write to them to ask them to come to the committee. I would love to compel these people to come to the committee to answer questions, but the reality is that we are running out of time, and that may be a job of work for a committee in the new Assembly. So any other issues on this before we move on?
I would just ask Mr Miskelly again, as some members know, he is receiving treatment almost on a daily basis, if not a daily basis, in hospital, but I think the option of providing us with written evidence should be offered. Mr Miskelly, I know we cancelled twice in November and December, but I think that option should be open. He seems to know more information about some of these matters than we know, and we should offer him that choice.
Chair, is it appropriate to ask the current finance minister to come, and I understand Simon Hamilton had been asked before and hadn't, and I'm not 100% sure why that meeting didn't take place, and would it be appropriate to reissue that invitation.
Members are consent.
Sorry, I missed that.
Simon Hamilton had previously, I think, been requested and hadn't, and I just haven't uncovered the reason why that invitation wasn't.
You'd asked for Mervyn Story to come along. Why was?
Well, first of all, in the Simon Hamilton, I don't understand why he hadn't appeared.
Chair,
Diary clash.
no, Chair, the Simon Hamilton had agreed to come to the committee and the evidence session had been set up, but there was an additional plenary session scheduled on that day, so the meeting was cancelled.
Well, would members feel it would be appropriate to reissue that invitation and address the issues that you had planned to? Well, then that would be satisfactory.
Okay, members agreed. Content to move on. Summary table request for information, pages 12 to 15 of the main pack for noting. Moving on to our first briefing then from DFP in regard to innovation laboratories. I refer members to papers 17-31 of your main pack, DFP briefing papers at pages 3 to 17 of your table pack. Can I welcome Malcolm and Christopher to the committee? Morning.
Good morning, thank you.
You want to make an opening statement and then we'll straight to questions.
Certainly do that. Some members of the committee may recall, first of all, can I apologise for the lateness of these papers. That was my fault entirely. I misunderstood the scheduling of this, so my apologies. The committee may recall some members of the committee may recall a previous presentation in which we give some detail of the background to the Innovation Laboratory. That was in November 14. I'll just quickly summarise that. The lab was set up by Minister Hamilton when he was Finance Minister in June 14. And the lab is really set up in response to public sector finance challenges and is typical of similar entities around the world. We began our life back in June 14 and we've done quite a lot of work supporting departments solve problems and so on, and since then we have really changed our way of going. Okay, we keep going?
Yes, go on ahead. Okay. Apologies. Yeah.
No problem. So we've done quite a lot of work around the description that we gave to the committee at that time, and since then we have really evolved our operating model since then. And today we'd like just to talk you through just some of the different ways in which we're approaching innovation in the public sector, and we can give you the presentation which is before you, and I'm happy to step you through that at a very brisk pace if that's what the committee wants.
Yes, yeah, I think that would be suitable. Thank you.
So just come to the first slide on this, which is really just page number 2, excuse me, which is a rehearsal really of some of the reasons why we have been created, and the 5 bullet points here really summarise the setting in which the Innovation Lab operates. The first is obviously the fact that there's increasingly less public funding around it, so we need to find maybe smarter ways of delivering public services. There's also an increase in public expectation of public services, and there are also new technologies around, and the Innovation Lab brings together the opportunity to address a number of these issues and to see what we can do to improve public services, perhaps provide better services in a time of constrained resources. Also, the complexity of public policy issues and public sector issues is such that we can do with bringing fresh thinking to that. And then finally, it's an opportunity to get into the world of co-design and human-centred design, where we're trying to bring public sector service users right up front into the design and the creation of policy, and into the design and the development of processes, etc. So that's a wee quick step through the why we exist. And then slide 3 is really a summation of what an innovation lab, or what we try to do. The words to the left-hand side are just a pen picture of what it is we do, and then the slides subsequent to this will give us a bit more detail. And basically we are about corralling the best minds that we can get, including experts from other jurisdictions, from academia, people who have solved and addressed public sector problems successfully in other places, bringing them together with the problem owners here in Northern Ireland, along with some service users, and facilitating a rich discussion so that we have created a safe space for key players to formulate and test ideas, make mistakes, learn from them, and to develop refined and added value solutions to complex challenges. So I suppose that's just a collection of words, but hopefully we can put a bit more detail around that as we go through the slides this morning. Slide number 4 then, it sort of calls out three aspects of our work, and I'll talk to them sort of very briefly. And I think it points to something of something towards the uniqueness of what we're trying to do, or maybe not unique as a bit of a stretch, but a fresh look at what we're doing. And the first is about bringing new approaches to public sector challenges, and we'll talk about 2 of those today in a bit more detail as we go through the presentation. The second point there on slide 4 is about us being a catalyst or a systems integrator. And what we have discovered as we have engaged with public sector colleagues and talked to, for example, various councils, to officials in different departments, is that you begin to see a thread of issues that are common in a lot of places. And part of our role then is to act like an integrator and say, well, we're hearing the same issue arise in different places. How can we support people who are grappling with that issue in addressing it? And a super example of that is the Innovation Lab project we're about to run later this month in connection with DOE and with the councils to support them in finding ways to increase the proportion of recyclable material that is being collected from households. The councils have a specific target, and while most of them are heading towards reaching that target, there's some way still to go, and we were hearing the same message across the piece. So we're bringing everybody together, and we will run a project later this month. We're bringing experts from different jurisdictions together to try and have a conversation and surface fresh ideas about how we might help the councils increase the proportion of recycling being collected from households. And then finally on the page, because we're in touch with a network of labs at different places, we are seeing new measures and new systems and new initiatives coming forward, and we're able to test these and try them and see if they've any value for wider use in public sector reform in Northern Ireland. And on page 5 is just a very quick overview of what we have done since we were created back in June 14, and we have run 12 specific lab projects. Most of those have been about ideas generation, and I make that point because it will become a little bit more significant when we start into the next to show where we're going in our operating model. And we're moving somewhat away from just simply generating ideas, trying to get into the space where we will be taking some of those ideas and creating prototypes and working with sponsors to quickly test prototypes in the real world, and then closing off those that don't work and trying to identify the ones that do, and then look towards wider application of them. So we will talk about some of these ones that are listed here as we go through, but I'm happy to take questions as we go, of course. Page 6 then is called the innovation curve, and ignore just the yellow boxes just for the moment, and maybe if you've got a black and white copy, that might be that clear to you. The innovation curve really describes the innovation process, and if you look at the top left-hand corner of this curve, this is really the world where we have spent most of our time in the projects that we have done to date, where we've been focusing on generating ideas, and that's the top left-hand corner. And what we're saying is we need to move round and down out of that world into developing and testing
Sorry,
prototypes.
folks, that's on your table of paper. It's actually page 10 on your pack. Not,
Right.
Slide,
I think we're slightly out of sync
Okay.
just because there's a wider pack. Yeah.
Thank you,
Go ahead.
Chair. So that we're moving ourselves, we want to move out of this just generating ideas, because that's something that I suppose a lot of people can do, and we want to move into where we're actually working to develop some of those ideas into trials, as I've said earlier. And moving then around this curve, as we affectionately call it, and to get to the point where you're pulling those innovations around up to the top right-hand side of it, where you're talking about actually changing systems. Now, that's a massive task. And the way I look at this diagram is, if you see the two halves of it, the left-hand side is about innovation. The right-hand side is about systems change, and all the challenges of systems change and persuading systems to adopt new processes and procedures all apply. So you can come up with rich ideas, and I believe we do. You then will always come to the point where you've got the challenge of making that change, get it embedded, and then get it scaled up. And this is a challenge that we're seeing. All the innovation labs that we're talking to, they're meeting the same challenge of actually pulling ideas and getting them into actually systems change, and that's a big step. But we're ambitious for that, and that comes, and our ability to do that is increasingly vested in the relationship that we have with the people who ask us to do the work, and their ability and their skills to make change in the organisations that they're leading. So at this point, I'll hand over to Christopher, and that's the next slide there. It's slide number 7. I'm not sure what that is in your pack, which has the tools to drive systemic change. And Christopher will give us a wee bit more detail. Yes,
so this is a little bit more detail of kind of the tools and methodologies about how we kind of generate new ideas and the kinds of things that we're doing within our labs and our workshops. And these have kind of been, I mean, I suppose over the last year, they've been generated by an awful lot of research and networking we've done with other labs across the world to see what they're doing, what are the new ideas that are being brought into public service delivery, and how can we think about applying them to the work that we do and with the sponsors that we work with. So I've got 3 of the key ones here, using behavioural insights, using design thinking, and embedding innovation. And I think probably from our research, labs across the world are trying to look at particularly human-centred design, kind of the middle one, in terms of trying to devise new services and products which are improving public services. I'll talk about each one in turn, and then I'll go through a little bit more detail on some of the things we've done. So we've been particularly inspired on the left-hand side by the work of the Behavioural Insights team in the UK. And essentially kind of the Behavioural Insights team was created in Cabinet Office to apply behavioural approaches to public policy and public service problems. And fundamentally, this is about thinking about the decision-making process that people, citizens, service users, patients, whoever those might be, are going through whenever they're interacting with your service, and designing interventions in order to improve that decision-making, or in helping people through that process, sometimes which can be very complicated. I'll talk a little bit in a minute about one of the things that we've done with DSD's Benefit Uptake campaign, about how we've used this approach. The second box in the middle is about design thinking, and design thinking has been used, I mean, obviously in things like service design and product design, and increasingly people are interested in how we can take those ideas and approaches and how we can apply them to public policy work. I'm going to talk through that process in a second, but essentially it involves moving from user insight through to problem definition, ideas generation, and then implementation. And it starts very much from the perspective of the user of a service, and use a creative process in order to generate new ideas. And then, again, the thing that's attractive to us is that it uses a prototyping and trialling process to develop those ideas, and goes from the idea that the best ideas are the ones that work, not the ones that seem like the best idea. And finally, on the right-hand side, what we've discovered is that public sector innovation labs generally have a remit in order to promote and embed innovation. We're looking to use our knowledge and skills in collaboration with business areas and other partners to expand the innovation capacity across the NICS. And we've done that through some lab projects, and we've got some other things in the pipeline. So if you turn to the next slide, which is the was called the
Yep.
Double Diamond.
Page methodology, that one?
Yeah, design methodology. But I'd just like to talk a little bit about design methodology. You'll see from the diagram that it's a 4-stage process. Now in practice it kind of moves backwards and forwards, but it's kind of easier to see in a kind of a linear form. And the basic premise is that you start with your users and your insights, and you move then into problem definition, and then you use those problems to widen out and generate as many ideas as you can before narrowing and focusing, selecting ideas and testing them. And at the end of the process, you should have a small number of workable ideas. You'll also notice that the problem definition stage is in the middle of this process rather than the very start. So you generate your problems based on what your users are saying, what your citizens are saying. For example of how we've used this, we actually we did a lab with the Volunteering Community Unit and DSD on their regional infrastructure support programme for the voluntary community sector, and we took them through 3 of these phases in 2 days, where we got together the group of people from the sector, people from within government, and experts from Scotland, from England, and from here, from academics from Northern Ireland who have expertise in the sector. And we started with a facilitated discovery process where people were working out where the new ideas and the new insights might come from. We then went into a very deep dive into what are the problems, what are the specific challenges, what are the questions we need to ask before going to an ideas generation session. And DSD are currently working with those ideas for their new regional infrastructure programme. The next bit, if you flick over to it's page 9, it's called the Behavioural Insights. It's got 2 letters either side, and this is just an example of the kinds of things that we've been experimenting with in terms of using behavioural approaches. On the left-hand side, you'll see a letter that DSD send out to people who might be entitled to more benefits, for example, attendance allowance. And the idea is they send a letter out, people phone in to get a benefits check. And on the right-hand side is our revised letter. And if you flick over to the next page, which is page 10, you'll see some of the things that some of the insights that we've applied to that letter in order to improve uptake, improve people phoning through. And they go from some insights within the text, which is people respond to what they know other people are doing, or people respond to the idea that there's a loss, weighs heavily than a gain. But perhaps the most significant bit is the bit in the middle. So we may not think of picking up the phone and making a phone call as a complicated process, but actually when you break it down, and what we try to do is break it down into this is what you have to do in order to phone back. It kind of helps people visualise and understand what it is that you want them to do. And we've got some interim results from this which would indicate that the revised letter doubled the number of people who made that call in order to get a benefit check. So we know from kind of experiments elsewhere that's the kind of results you might expect, but nevertheless I think it's kind of still a little bit kind of surprising that small changes like that end up getting kind of big results. So I'll hand back to Malcolm to kind of talk through the rest of the presentation.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Christopher. The behavioural insights subject that Christopher's been talking about is probably one of the areas where we see a lot of potential. And one of the things we're doing, and Christopher's leading this, is working with the Department of Health and Social Services on prescriptions and pharmaceuticals. And we call it the problem of the last mile. So we borrowed this from some academic elsewhere, but the problem of the last mile is if you think of a bridge being constructed and you're doing the last span of it, and you've all the engineering in place, but somehow or another you can't make the last span or the last mile of it, and then bring that into public sector problems and go to your understanding of the world of medicines. So the system that's in place now has a vast array of pharmaceuticals. We have a GP network, we've got pharmacies all over the place, and people can get their drugs that they need on tap and it's put into their hand. The challenge is the system possibly isn't getting the full value or the efficacy of that system, and there's a gap between what the system provides and the efficacy of it. And we call that the last mile problem. So how do you cover the gap? You've put the prescriptions out, you've given people their medication, and how do you surface the full value of all of that? And that takes us into the realm of human behaviours, because it's human behaviours that we reckon are impeding the full value of all that being realised. And our colleagues in DHS SPS have suggested that if we could persuade everybody, and we're not going to be able to do that in the Innovation Lab, but if we could help towards it, that would be good. If you could persuade everybody to take their full medication when it's prescribed and as prescribed, that the net benefit of that to the system, we understand, would be the equivalent of discovering a new drug. So what we're doing, and what Christopher's leading now, is a piece is looking at what I like to call, or what he is, I'll have to give credit to Christopher to come up with the term, the last mile problem. So it's not about innovation and new drugs, obviously that's not our realm, it's not about new systems, it's about how do you understand what's impeding people taking the full value of the medication. And we see that as a very rich area for us in the Innovation Lab, understanding human motivations, human behaviours, and then how can you influence those and change those behaviours, and what levers are required in order to help people to do that. So that's an example where we see behavioural insights really growing, and the project for that will run in April, and we are already engaging with citizens through the Patient and Client Council, and engaging with people who have various medical problems, and through that process they've been talking about the issues that they may have with medication. So that's a big piece for us, and hopefully if we can come back in the future and maybe report something around what we learn from that. And of course, in an Innovation Lab, some things will fail, and we recognise that as well. So just 2 slides just to touch on very briefly, Chair, and then we can conclude and take questions. Slide 11 in my pack, roles and responsibilities, really calls out the dual responsibility here. To the left is what we in the Innovation Lab team are responsible for. I'm not going to go into that. To the right-hand side, we talk about the sponsor. The sponsor is the senior public official who has responsibility for the particular issue or challenge or problem, and we have to work very closely with them. And the more engaged they are in the process, the more bought in they are into it, the better potential there is for delivering good outcomes. And then the final slide, and I'll just step through that quickly as well. To the right-hand panel then, and it's called Lessons Learned and Looking Forward. To the right-hand side is some of our priorities for this coming year. We have mentioned human-centred design and service design, so we're going to do a lot more work and projects of that nature. The second bullet point refers to behavioural insights, which I've spoken about as well. I've also mentioned the third point, which is about prototyping and piloting and seeing if we can, what things look like in the real world, and then moving from there into potentially systems change. And then probably the final point is streamlining the processes that we use and ensuring that what we do represents good value for money. So that's a quick counter through, Chair.
Okay, thanks very much. I think there's no doubt it is. It is an exciting concept, and none of us would doubt the need to innovate and to learn and to do things differently and to streamline. But as you said, it is an era of reduced public finances, and I'm not sure if you could outline how much it does cost, and how can you convince us of the cost-benefit analysis, and that it isn't just another trendy management concept.
And I think those are very valid questions, and we're exercised by them as well. I think each innovation project costs probably around £30,000. Most of that is in the investment we put in the work that we do in the lab, and it's really salaries. In terms of actual money for venues and all that, those are small amounts. So it averages around 30,000 per project. Some will cost a lot less than that, and others more. I think it compares very favourably, for example, with the consultancy-led projects. I think, first of all, it's more cost-effective. What we do costs a lot more if you're going out to the consultancy market, I believe. I firmly believe we get a much richer product. And the reason for that is how we corral the people together to look at the problem. So this isn't a theoretical examination of an issue. These are the people who are actually living with the problem or have expertise in it, and we bring them together, as Custer have said, in relation to the work we did with Voluntary and Community Unit. We bring them together for 2 days, and it's the collective energy of those people generating ideas and solutions that have collective ownership. Now, that's not to say that everybody comes to our events is 100% agree with everything that's said, but we draw out from it that which is common and where we do get agreement. So I believe we're much more competitive than going to the consultancy market. I believe we get a far richer product. I think we get it quicker. And we're now starting to see, as we've heard already, some of the immediate benefits of that with our work with DSD, where for a short and small investment and small changes, we're now seeing potential for some people in Northern Ireland in the older age bracket to be actually tapping into the social security benefits that are available to them. So that would be my take on it anyway, so that's my thoughts.
Okay, and I'll open it to members. You mentioned the DSD campaign, but are there other sort of tangible outcomes or benefits that you can point to from other labs? Yeah.
Yes, I think if you go to the list of the labs, the 12 labs, each of those has produced a report, and most of them were ideas generation. So those ideas were generated, recommendations, and they were handed over to the sponsoring department. It's page 5 on the slide deck. I'm not sure what the number is in yours. And all of those will have produced recommendations that the sponsor has been able to take away. What we're keen to do, and to really address the point that you're making, is to get embedded into that. Let's start developing prototypes. Let's help the sponsor move beyond just getting a series of recommendations into testing and delivering and hopefully making some real change on the ground.
Okay, and you mentioned I think 9 in development and 9 proposed. What are the? I mean, you had proposed previously one on preventative spend. Is that anything?
No, what we find we have quite a number of projects that are in development, and then when we engage with sponsors and we try to put a shape around them, they just don't fit the Innovation Lab model, so that didn't come forward. So for example, some of the work we're doing is on debt centralisation, and that came out of the cross-cutting review that the executive approved, and in PSRD we've been given responsibility for looking at some of the cross-cutting themes, and that's on debt centralisation. So we will convene an Innovation Lab to look at that, and we will bring experts from different jurisdictions. We're looking at the medicines optimisation piece I spoke about on drugs and so on. We're doing a piece with DOJ on court fines, and seeing what we can do to encourage people to pay their fines more promptly. And we're also doing a piece on dementia and understanding the costs of dementia, and that will help DHS SPS look into the future to see the rising costs that will accrue from more and more people getting dementia. It's quite a range of things, and I'm sure we'd be happy to maybe provide maybe in written detail if that would be helpful.
Exciting stuff. Just going to open to members. Gary, you had a question?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. And obviously, thanks for coming along. I must say I'm new to this particular idea. I haven't heard of it, but obviously I am more aware now, and since having a look over the minutes as well. But a bit more detail in terms of, you mentioned there the average cost of projects around £30,000. Obviously there's others that are less than that and others that are more than that. Can you give an idea of what that would actually entail? Because you mentioned about 2 days, you know, bringing people together and ideas and all of that. That sounds very good, and I'm sure it's very worthwhile, and you have had success out of that. But I suppose it's you know, how you justify, you know, that amount of money, and that, you know, not saying us as elected reps, but we are involved, you know, hands-on in terms of listening to organisations as well about ideas. So, you know, how do you get to the finishing point? Do you write a report, and, you know, where does the report go? Is it shelved, or is it implemented? Can you give us a bit of an idea around that?
Okay. One of the things that we reckon is unique about the Innovation Lab. Sorry, I don't like to use the word unique because that sounds really exclusive, but slightly different about the Innovation Lab is the investment we put in as a team before you convene the two-day event. So there's a lot of investment and energy goes in there in researching and doing citizens' insight and talking to sponsors. For example, in the medicines optimisation piece I was referring to earlier, the team have been out talking to a lot of citizens about their prescriptions and so on. So there's a lot of upfront investment by the team. So that a lot of the cost will go in that part of it. The actual cost of the event will be fairly small, maybe a few £1,000s at the most. But so that would, and I can provide more detail, of course, of this. So that's probably where the cost goes. Investment up front in fully understanding as a team what the issues are, and then when we produce something at the end, we produce a report that goes to the sponsor that summarises everything that was discussed in the innovation event and pulls forward out of that the ideas that are for perhaps prototyping that I was referring to earlier. So we do have a process to follow.
Thanks, Chair. And when you're getting people to obviously get involved, how do you do that? How are you getting individuals to come forward? How do you select these people to bring their ideas to the table? Because often we find that the people who maybe have the greatest ideas are those that are shyest, those that maybe sit in the background and don't put themselves forward. So how do you reach those people?
And that is a big worry, and I accept that. Let me tell you a bit about the Innovation Lab we did in June last year on dementia. We ran that event in the in Hemsworth Court, which is a new facility off the Shankill Road, purpose-built for people with dementia and their families. We ran it in Hemsworth Court, and all the people who live there, their families, people with dementia, were able to come in and sit in, and they did sit in, and they contributed, and they felt comfortable about contributing. We went up to Derry and we spent time in a community centre there, and equally there were citizens from Derry who came in whose families have living with dementia and so on. So they come in as well. So we're deliberately going to places where we can access the folks you're talking about who may not necessarily have a voice, may not be comfortable about talking, and they come in, and it's a fairly big group of people, and it's very informal, and we give time for the voice of the people who are living the world in the real world with these particular issues to be heard. And I have to say it was very humbling to hear folks talk about what it's like to live with dementia. So hopefully that's a way in which we're addressing the concerns that you've called out.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Chair. And Leslie, and then Martin.
Thanks very much, Chair. Good morning. Interesting stuff. I would be 100%. I've been to other innovation labs in different parts of the world, and they all have a different ethos. I take it you haven't developed an ethos yet.
Well, we're in the challenging position of selling it, I suppose, as a lab within a central government department, attempting to offer services across all the different parts of the public sector, whereas probably some of the labs that you'll have seen, because they're created by a newly incoming mayor, for example, in one of the cities in New York, who has a particular issue or concern about education. So some of the labs will be very focused on specific subjects, whereas here we're in a position of having to be fairly broad in our outlook. But what we aim to do, I suppose to put in a nutshell, is what we had on the first slide, which is to create this space. Sorry, slide number 3, to create the space for key players to come together to discuss issues. And that would be our principal aim.
I thought you would have had to do more than provide space.
Well,
you mentioned catalyst, which was even a fairly mild form, but there needs to be more, I believe, of drive in the thing. For example, you use all sorts of words which are very familiar to us in the civil service. Innovation.
Yes.
It's a scary word. Risk.
Yeah.
Generally speaking, civil service is risk averse. You talk about system change and openness, both alien words, I would suggest again. You talk about political and senior buy-in. How much of this is real, or is it really only a fantasy?
Well, I can understand your scepticism, and I think we have to put cards on the table. It is a challenge for us to achieve these things, and I think when I was talking about the innovation curve, and we talked about the part where you come down and you move from where you can be creative, and then you step into the bit where you've got to make the change. Those are very difficult things, and you've just highlighted them, and that's an experience that I think is common to all people in this sort of innovation space. Yes, we can be creative and we can get the right people together, but once you're trying to change a big system, those challenges still remain, and I would acknowledge them. And we need the sponsors, the senior sponsors, to be with us 100% from the start, and to recognise some of the challenges that are going to come their way when we bring some of the innovative ideas forward.
Time, of course, will tell there, you
Absolutely.
know, whether lip service and paid. I was also interested to see that your curve went down at that stage. What is the reason for that? Why should it go down?
I think it's just the way it's presented.
Why wouldn't it go up?
Well,
Why wouldn't it go to the side? You've got to be innovative here. We went down.
You need a lab on this.
we're loving this just.
Anyway, sorry, Gigi, just finally, Chair, and very much on a serious one. I'm always concerned about process versus outcomes, and generally speaking, process we have and few outcomes. You mentioned dementia, and you mentioned the drugs, you know, as per prescription. Did you see any relation between those things? Drugs, dementia, mental health?
No, I haven't, but I appreciate they're big challenges in their own right, but we haven't linked them up.
See, people with dementia, people with other mental health disorders, quite often don't remember to take their pills when they're supposed to take them.
Well, that's a valid point, and that's part of looking into this challenge, this last mile challenge, about how do you help people who perhaps are unable or incapable of taking their drugs. So, yeah, I accept that point. Yeah.
You may well think I've taken them. Anyway, I've taken enough time, Chair.
Very interesting. Martin.
Thank you, Deputy Chair. And thank you, Chris and Malcolm, for the presentation. I was wondering, just have you given any thought as to the methodology of the Innovation Lab, and have you innovated the way you carry them out? Is there any crowdsourcing? Is there any opportunity for those who aren't in the room to contribute? Is there any way that those of us who weren't there can look back at some of the deliberations? I understand some of these deliberations, of course, are in camera, as it were, confidential, but I presume one of the stimulating aspects of the Innovation Lab is getting these people who are very bright, who are experienced, who are at the coalface, getting them together and from different sectors. But I take it it's the good old-fashioned 19th century system. Everybody gets in a room, talks, it's written up, and it's put out there. Or can I look back at some of those discussions, or could I even, God forbid, could I even contribute through crowdsourcing?
A couple of different answers. So one of the things we have kind of said is that in order to allow people to talk openly and freely, those conversations, we record what, you know, eventually what happens in the outcome, and we provide a written report for whoever's asked us to do the lab for them. But, you know, and we give a flavour of the discussions that happened throughout the period that we have people there, but we don't keep detailed records or let people observe those, because that affects what people say and how people think and so forth. In terms of your other question about kind of crowdsourcing, I mean, essentially a bit of what we're trying to do here is kind of open innovation work, where we're trying to get different people to look at the problem. Now, what we've done so far is we've been trying to work with small numbers of people to facilitate discussions. It's easier to facilitate with small numbers of people than very large numbers of people, and we haven't taken that step from kind of one-to-one or group conversations into widespread crowdsourcing. But we know that that's a tool and methodology that we are thinking about using, and we know that other things like challenge prizes have been very effective in terms of innovation in the US in particular. The American government uses challenge prizes quite a lot, and other organisations in the UK have been using that kind of thing to, again, crowdsource new ideas. Those methodologies are a little bit more than just pure idea generation, but they're on a list of things that we know and tools that we can use, but we haven't kind of got to those just yet. So And in terms of the innovation of the methodology, I mean, we have moved quite significantly from where we were when we started, when we were kind of doing long periods of hot housing with people, and we're now trying to move and develop and use design thinking in order to quickly and iterate what we're trying to look at. So we have been looking at the methodology, we have been looking at what we can use and what we should use, and how to use different tools for different approaches and practices.
Well, you know, I don't have any other questions, but maybe you would take that back. It seems to me if you were, I'm not talking about terribly sensitive issues, but let's say increasing the use of bikes in Belfast.
Yeah.
It seems to me if you were going to do an innovation lab in that opening it up to people from other cities and to the internet, we're supposed to be in favour of democracy here, so we won't criticise you if you open it up to the entire world and let everyone have a say. There's clearly a way to do that also gets an output, but I wouldn't overemphasise the necessity for confidentiality and so on. I understand that's in some cases, but I think the benefits of being more open, or certainly letting more people take part, be useful. But maybe in one of these 10 or one of the 9 coming up, maybe we could, as a group, we could say, okay, with that innovation lab, we might innovate a little bit about the methodology. Or am I going to last, Kylie?
Okay, thank you very much. Our members agreed that we will write to DFP for just, I think you'll forward us on further detail on some of those future labs. Well, just thank you very much. That was very interesting indeed.
Sure.
Members, next we are item 5. We're going to look at the dormant accounts and get a briefing from the Community Foundation NI, and we have Tiziana O'Hara, Patrick Min and Nigel McKinney.
So we have to say you're looking much better this morning than normal. It's younger and fresher looking.
The bloodless coup, as you say. Yes. Okay, thank you very much, folks. Well, are you content to just make an opening statement and then we'll have some questions for you?
Absolutely. If I could just get a glass of water.
Absolutely, yes, yeah. Cruel and unusual, otherwise, if we don't let you be.
Yep. Thank you very much, members, for the opportunity to address you this morning. My name is Nigel McKinney. I'm employed by the Community Foundation for Northern Ireland, but we, under service level agreement, look after the Building Change Trust. And just a little bit of background to that. The Trust is an independent charitable trust fund registered with the Charity Commission, established back in 2008 with a £10 million 10-year expendable endowment from the Big Lottery Fund, and therefore the Trust will have spent all of its resources by the end of December 2018. And whilst we're a charitable trust, we're not a traditional grant maker. Making grants is part of what we do. It would be more accurate to describe us as an operational foundation. And just to put the amount of money into context, our planned expenditure of approximately £1 million per annum is really 0.2% of the estimated £750 million annual expenditure by voluntary community and social enterprise VCSE organisations in Northern Ireland. So in our strategy, therefore, we've worked carefully to identify what areas would modest enough expenditure, £1 to £2 million, potentially make a strategic and transformative difference to how voluntary community and social enterprises operate in Northern Ireland into the future. And the areas we've identified are social finance, collaboration, impact practice, social innovation, and also creative space for civic thinking. I'm going to focus on the social finance aspect. And I suppose, just to be clear at the outset what we mean by that, and by social finance we mean the use of investment into not-for-profit organisations to achieve both social impact and some financial return. In comparison to grant aid, which you'll be familiar with, is primarily focused on social impact only with no financial return. And in our work since 2009, we've supported the development of new forms of investment and support, ultimately, for a more sustainable VCSE sector. Very quickly, what we've done to date, we've made a £1 million capital investment in Charity Bank to support their deposit taking, loan making and initial investment readiness activity in Northern Ireland. That's been through the form of an advanced diploma at Ulster University in third sector sustainable investment over a 5-year period. We also supported Charity Bank and the Ulster Community Investment Trust USIT to look at the supply and demand of social finance in Northern Ireland. That was a study back in 2012, and that recommended some both demand and supply side actions as follows. One, the need to build financial and commercial capability in the third sector, investment readiness. The need to focus on funding for outcomes and impact, and for both VCSE organisations and their funders to think more about impact practice. We have a separate programme on that called Inspiring Impact. The need for product innovation beyond traditional secured lending, and that identified the need to look at blended products, grants and loans combined, and also other approaches which are more common elsewhere in the UK, things called revenue participation agreements and so on. And also the need to support innovation and growth within the sector and also in the funders through sharing and learning, and the idea of a one-stop shop platform for access for information and support. If I could just talk a little bit about the whole concept of investment readiness. Back in 2014 we commissioned Charity Bank to work with others to look at this concept in Northern Ireland and models of how it could be supported, and that research looked at this issue in GB, Europe and also internationally. And what do we mean by investment readiness? And I suppose it's in the context of repayable finance. The investee is seen as possessing the attributes which makes them an investable proposition by an appropriate investor for the finance they are seeking. It seems somewhat nebulous, but it's really about capability. That research recommended and identified, firstly, the need for a common point of access for information and support for organisations seeking investment, but also those in public funding and philanthropy. But it also identified some key themes for Northern Ireland which were consistent with those emerging in the UK, Europe and further afield. In the Northern Ireland context, a plentiful supply of capital is available from social investors, but that's particularly in the secured lending market. Typically, loan deals in excess of £50,000 secured on property. Secondly, there is a growing demand from frontline organisations for capital to meet social need. And thirdly, the current supply doesn't meet demand because the current market infrastructure isn't fit for purpose, in part because of a lack of investment readiness, but also because the products that organisations want aren't available, because they can't be delivered on commercial terms by the existing lenders, whether they be social lenders or mainstream banks. We've taken that bit of research further, and we're currently working with both Arts and Business Northern Ireland and the Northern Ireland Environment Link, the umbrella body for the ENGOs, and have commissioned research projects to look at the potential of social investment to finance arts and cultural activity and separately environmental activity locally. Those research projects are nearing conclusion now. The findings will be made available to the committee and publicly, probably in the early spring. The findings are similar to our previous, more general research, but look at more detail at those particular subsectors. As well as investing in Charity Bank, our trust has experimented with specialist investment readiness activity in Northern Ireland. We commissioned the Community Shares Ready programme from Cooperative Alternatives. Already this has resulted in 2 new Community Benefit Society enterprises and the raising of 190,000 through public share offers. So I'd like to invite Tiziana O'Hara from Cooperative Alternatives to explain a little bit about that.
Thank you very much, Nigel. Thank you for having us here. So, Cooperative Alternatives is a cooperative development body in Northern Ireland, and we help to set up and grow cooperatives by providing them with business, legal and financial advice. I would like to illustrate today to you the advantage of a program of investment readiness, because since 2013 we have been delivering the program that you just heard from Nigel, the Community Shares Ready project. And this is a specialist program, and is essentially what we are doing. It's an investment.
I'm just going to interrupt you briefly just to declare an interest. I do have shares in that, and just some advice probably to declare that.
Ooh,
just for transparency, but you can continue.
And I'm a practitioner on the ground, so this is what is my role within Cooperative Alternatives. So investment readiness means the state at which the organization reached the point and they are ready to receive the investment they are seeking for. So, in particular, my project, I'm going to describe what we are doing. We help support an organization to get prepared to launch a community share offer. So this is what we are specialized for. The organization that we help and support are only cooperatives and community benefit societies, that they are registered under the Industrial and Provident Societies Act. And the share they're eventually going to sell are not ordinary shares, are typical shares of cooperative societies. They are called the withdrawable shares, and they have specific characteristics. So all these to let you know that these are initiatives that very much fit well with the community spirit or the community. And in fact, since 2013, we have been targeting the voluntary community and social enterprise sector. So we are not interested in private sector, and that's not what we are about. The support starts with understanding, first of all, and this is where investment readiness comes to mind. What is actually investment readiness? So we start with understanding, first of all, if raising community share is appropriate for the organization. Do they have the right project? Do they have the right people? Do they have the right idea? So that's our conversation with them. And indeed, we say, why you're coming and you wanted to ask people that is the public, to invest in your project? Would you not be better going to the bank? Or maybe doing crowdfunding on the internet. So here is our first approach to investment readiness, being very much upfront. And also because we are setting up cooperatives that are in nature very democratic and put members at the center of decision making. So at this stage, the support address question also about the capital that the organization is required. Is it proportionate capital? You know, are you going out and ask for 1 million when you need only 500,000? Is the organization has the capacity to deal with that? You know, it's okay raising money, but then can you spend it? Can you spend it within a certain time? And is the people available to implement the project? Most of the organizations in the voluntary and community sectors are run by volunteers. Some of them are professional volunteers, and some of them are just volunteers that want to learn something new. So it's about capacity as well. So who is doing what is another big important part of investment readiness. In practice, we test what in using some jargon that I don't like because this is not what we are about, but in practice we test and develop their business model. This is what we do. We don't tell them that. We don't use a jargon word. We are really there to really make the idea that they have a viable financially and also from a human resource point of view. This is a generic function. So a generic function that many providers can offer in Northern Ireland. So I don't think that it's our specific help. Our specific help comes also at the later stage, and it's an expert type of support. So we help them to legally choose their structure. We help them to register that structure. So we are a specialist in Industrial and Provident Societies Act, and we do use those rules. We are expert in providing an interesting outlook at their own financial projections, because share capital needs to be taken in consideration in their own financial projection. So it's not a projection that only happens for 5 years, it's about a 20 years projection. In particular, if a people is putting money into it, I want to know what happened not only tomorrow, but 5 years' time, in 20 years' time. So, and also, are there any community fund provisions? Because these are cooperatives that do build community funds, that is capital put aside to be reinvested and recycled into the community at a later stage. We also have a small budget of direct cost for the organization. That means that if, for instance, the organization wanted to go and lease a piece of land, then we can get a solicitor to look at the deeds and have that expert opinion on ownership. And then we write the community share offer document. and that's the main part of our job, because this is what we are going out with to the public to ask to invest in. So you mostly are familiar with crowdfunding, that you are giving some money on the internet. This is it's a crowdfunding but done with shares. So what the public is buying into is equity. So, and because we are cooperatives, when you are buying equity in a cooperative, you become a member of that cooperative. So therefore, you are at the center of democratic mechanism, decision-making of that organization. So if you want to, I don't know if you are allowed to, but I have 2 shares. And so that's an important document. That's what we want. It's a clear contract between the public and the organization. And that's part, again, of investment readiness. We needed to explain very clearly the terms of the offer to our potential investor, the case of cooperatives, what the members can be, how can they be involved at a later stage. Then finally the preparation goes in also to prepare the organization to pitch the offer to the public. So we help them to really use the right terminology when they actually go out. We needed to be accountable for what we are doing, and so that's another important aspect of investment readiness. And also the process of engaging the public, because you need to really engage people that believes in your project. And the planning of the engagement doesn't happen when you have already the offer done. It starts from the beginning when we started to talk to them. We can also offer professional secretariat service in some of the organizations that we helped, because we think that once you raise a share capital, you need to maintain accountable records, so register of membership. So we build the capacity of the committee so that once we have done that bit, we come out. So here is our example. In conclusion, what I'm here today to agree with Nigel is that when you are thinking about a new community fund, when you are bringing a new community fund to the sector, think about investment ratings as well. Throwing money to organizations without the right support for them to accept that money it's an important part of what we have done. So it's not as important, if it's not more important, what is the amount of money that we raise. So this is just to say that your decision has to consider all the work that goes behind that.
Okay, so that was just an example that it's not enough to have new financial products available for voluntary community organisations if they don't have the skills and capacity to access them, and that skills and capacity needs to be provided. And the lessons are that it often needs to be not generic but bespoke to their particular subsector or business. So our position is that we welcome the proposed development of the new Community Finance Fund for Northern Ireland utilising dormant accounts. It's a significant source of new finance, and done properly it can really enable organisations to make a positive impact on people and place. It's clear VCSE organisations will operate in a time of reduced and constrained funding. Innovation and change it's both inevitable and desirable. And we've seen innovation already with the likes of crowdfunding, but there are other opportunities. So we recommend that the following are taken into account in the development and delivery of the intervention. One, we're not talking about replacing grant funding of VCSE activity with debt financing. Grant funding is important, but in many cases organisations can be able to achieve social impact with debt financing. That financing must be open to as wide a range of organisations as possible. Secondly, the fund should aim to revolve to a significant extent, and in doing that, social impact can be achieved again and again and again. I think it's important that any intervention shouldn't duplicate or displace existing provision. If an organisation can get a loan on commercial terms from an existing lender, it would be inappropriate to use new finance to provide more beneficial rates. I think crucially, we believe a market for debt financing can be grown in Northern Ireland through both demand and supply side actions working together. Experimentation and flexibility will be needed to get the right provision for our sector locally. And typically we must remember 70% of organisations in Northern Ireland have incomes of less than £100,000 per annum. The secure lending market in Northern Ireland is well served by existing social finance lenders, UCIT and Charity Bank, and what we believe is needed are developments in respect of unsecured lending, smaller amounts of money and hybrids of grants combined with loans, flexible offerings to organisations based on skilled analysis and judgment of what they can accept. Critically, new provision must be accompanied with appropriate investment readiness activity, targeted maybe at the sector as a whole, but also particular subsectors, arts, environment, energy. They'll have particular needs, and that only can often be met by specialist support. As we've said, it's an opportunity to test and develop some of these new approaches in Northern Ireland. You can build on existing success locally, community shares, UCIT, Charity Bank, others, but learn from developments in GB and elsewhere. So we have the work of the New Access Foundation, supported by Big Society Capital and Big Lottery Fund in GB. There are initiatives such as Community Share Scotland, the Big Potential and Power to Change investment readiness programmes in England, where there have been significant intervention. And there's work of pioneering organisations such as the Esme Fairbairn Trust and Key Fund in Yorkshire, which have tested some new approaches in areas where I suppose there's been withdrawal of traditional industries and lots of problems. I suppose it's important to note as well there are other actions that need to be taken outside the Community Finance Fund to help build resilient organisations. We can't rely on a new source of funding to help support the development of more enterprising and resilient vulnerable community organisations. Public funders and philanthropic funders need to think carefully about how their existing funding interventions can help build resilient organisations and maybe move away from the whole project funding only aspect. And finally, with your permission, I'd just like to ask Patrick Min, the Regional Manager of Charity Bank, to tell us about his knowledge and experience around how hybrid models could be particularly effective locally.
Yeah, so to recap, Charity Bank is a non-profit savings and loan bank. It's regulated fully by the PRA and the FCA. It's been running since 2002. We effectively lend our savers' money exclusively to charities and social enterprises. That savers' money in Northern Ireland, the vast majority of it actually comes from credit unions who place their money with us. I thought it was important to revisit the hybrid savings and loan idea since the briefing you got 2 weeks ago, because I wanted to explain the why about it, because I think that's quite important. Effectively, particularly work we've done in Yorkshire and the Humber in the past convinced us that that was an appropriate model for Northern Ireland. The reason being that we want to improve, I'm taking social impact as a given, right? Everybody requires community benefit to be delivered. But looking purely at the financial sustainability of social sector organisations, one of the issues around the traditional grant models is that a grant will not make an organisation any more financially sustainable by the end of that grant than it was. So if you're a department and I'm a family and community association and you give me a £100,000 grant to say do 5,000 interventions with people with learning disabilities, and I come back and I said I've done my 5,000 interventions, I've done it for 90 grand, then you're going to ask me for the 10 grand back. If anything, I'm actually slightly less financially sustainable by the end of it through just depreciation and various other things. So that's why social sector organisations do not have a wild pile of free reserves at the moment. The grant loan idea, in that model, the grant acts effectively, it still affords all of the protection of public monies in terms of the grant element. It helps deliver the service that's being commissioned. But it also effectively acts as what in the private sector people would call it a start-up funding. If you combine that then with the unrestricted funding that's represented by the loan finance that goes toward that, then the organisation is able to effectively benefit from the efficiencies and the efficient delivery of the services that it provides, and then get that 10 grand and put it onto its free reserves at the end of its financial year, and suddenly its balance sheet is 10 grand better off. Now, the reason why it's not just desirable that we have social sector organisations with increasingly stronger balance sheets, but it's absolutely critical now, it's probably fourfold. It's a given that there is less money in the system in general anyway, so organisations have to figure out how to exploit other forms of finance than just grant finance. So we accept that as a given. The second reason that we've seen increasingly is that statutory organisations, where social sector organisations have received grant offers and have delivered the work according to that grant, have suffered from administrative delays of payments from those statutory organisations. Now, if they don't have free reserves, it's very difficult for them to fill those gaps in the cash flow that those delays can lead to. So that's another big reason that they need that. Third reason is that we're seeing a transition in terms of commissioning services from the departments to effectively project funding, where the department has come along and saying, look, we'll give you the money for these deliverables, but unlike before, we're not going to pay for these 2 salaries or these 2 people to deliver that service. We're not going to contribute to your own costs for running your office or your telephone system. We just want to pay for the bit that we want delivered. Which then leads to the question, well, how does that organisation pay for its core costs, if not through grant? The answer is through free reserves. So, and then lastly, what we're getting is you have situations, again, in transition where commissioning for contracts and procurement is going out, and there are checklists and criteria to make the shortlist for to be able to apply for certain contracts from the departments. And those criteria include financial performance indicators. It might be what their total turnover is per year, so that the departments have the comfort of scale, if you like, or it might be about liquidity in terms of, you know, you need to make sure you have at least as much to pay off your next 12 months liabilities as you have in terms of current assets. Or it may be you need to have this amount of reserves, period, and if you don't have that, then you can't apply for the contract. So that's why the grant loan hybrid is absolutely crucial, we think, and could be a weather-changing initiative, effectively, from the department and the officials to encourage that, and we think is a great use of the dormant accounts money as well.
Okay, thank you very much. That was an excellent presentation. Just a couple of questions, then I'm going to open it up to the floor. You did talk about lessons from similar programmes across the water. Are there any specific things that you could read over directly to Northern Ireland that went particularly badly that we could avoid, or particularly well that we can import?
I think the things that have went well is a realisation that what organisations need to develop their business models is quite often not generic support with developing a business plan. It's specialist support, one, maybe within their particular sector, and then secondly, with the particular aspect that they're trying to model. So, for example, we've the example here, an organisation seeking to raise finance through community shares needs an expert registered practitioner who knows how to write and prepare a share offer. Not somebody more generally. The other thing that's went particularly well in GB are different models of providing investment readiness support. There are a number of diagnostic tools that have been developed at considerable expense. They can readily be imported and adapted to the Northern Ireland context. And then there are different ways in which organisations now can receive expert support. Rather than some programmes, putting out generic adverts, if you need expert support, apply. It's done on a competitive basis. Those organisations have to have some stake, some investment of their own time and resources maybe at risk in order to receive the specialist support that is expensive. So those things are, I think, particularly important. In the Northern Ireland context, 1.5 million people, small place, we would be surely well placed to have investment readiness activity developed and delivered on both a regional basis and targeting particular sectors where there's need.
I just want to pick up briefly, you mentioned about displacement and that this shouldn't be a kind of a tool or a service available to people who can access credit in more traditional ways. How do you make sure that's the case and it's not people availing of favourable terms, but also that a good community interest project isn't pushed out and pushed into the private sector that would otherwise fit the criteria?
I think and you might have some answers on this, I think you're going to rely on the skill and experience of the lending or the delivery organisation on that. So those, whether it be UCIT or Charity Bank, will employ skilled analysts that look at organisations' financial modelling, business planning, and can tell the level, what's appropriate. Is secured lending appropriate? Would unsecured lending be more appropriate? What level of grant versus loan might be combined? Would you have?
Yeah, I mean, certainly there's an element of due diligence will have to happen for everything, whether it's grant or loan or both. And there's no reason why those criteria and the processes behind those can't be applied to the grant loan hybrid and the issues of those. The caveat, though, is that it has to be proportionate to what you're trying to do, and I think the officials were talking about a range of roughly, without completely being sure about it, they were talking about a range of £10,000 to £100,000 interventions, that type of thing. The caveat would be that you would want the type of processes and the admin processes, particularly in a case where you're trying to develop an evergreen fund, you would want to make sure that the admin and the due diligence and the costs and the overheads associated with that are proportionate to the scale of the investment that you want to do. But as long as you have very clear terms of reference to begin with and what the interventions should be, actually it's relatively straightforward to ensure that due diligence is observed, that organisations aren't overloaded with debt finance, that the appropriate level of medication is applied, if you like, without overdosing them with the wrong kind of finance.
Chair, it might be particularly important to note why traditional lenders haven't been delivering unsecured lending for smaller amounts of money to vulnerable community organisations, and this mismatch between supply and demand. And the reason is, Patrick said, it's risky and it's costly, so it needs subsidy. None of the social lenders can say, well, we can't operate a loan fund sustainably if all we do is unsecured lending for small amounts of money. The administration and other costs and the risk of default on repayment are too high. But that's particularly why something like dormant accounts can intervene in that area of what is market failure.
Yeah.
Just would like to add a couple of things going back to the chair questions. Community benefit has to be important for this community, and there are certain things in the structure in which you are setting up the organization that needs to be tested. And one of the things that we are requiring for our organization is they have an asset lock, so that the assets are not then distributed among members, but they are maintaining community ownership. That's are all other things that they are not really financial kind of check, but they are more structural checks. This is why we are very passionate about cooperative structures, the asset lock. The community benefit in our structure also turns now to be a community fund, so that some of the money really needs to be recycled into the organisation where it stands.
Okay. Well, just with an eye on time, I'll open it to members, because Jim, I think you wanted to.
Yes. Good to meet you again, Zahara. Part of the last time we met. Would any of the organisations that you're dealing with have access to lottery funding? Would they have been able to obtain lottery funding?
Maybe better if you answer this, because we don't tend to directly grant aid organisations.
No, so the point I'm trying to make is the organisations that you advise, have they access to lottery funding?
Well, our work, I suppose, within the community and voluntary sector covers the whole swathe of organisations. Those that access lottery funding and those that don't. That's in terms of the interventions that Building Change Trust has sponsored this last 7 years. So we wouldn't, if an organisation phoned me tomorrow looking for assistance with a particular problem, I wouldn't make a distinction. I would advise them as to the best of my ability where to go, regardless of where they were willing to receive funding.
Do you understand where the basis of the dormant account money, why it has been made available?
I am aware that there have been concerns previously around those organisations that, because of ethical objections, weren't willing to apply for lottery funding in Northern Ireland. I wasn't aware that the dormant accounts were predicated on making funds available only to that type of organisation.
Well, that's the crucial issue here. I mean, there are organisations that not only can't, but their constitution precludes them from applying for lottery funding because it's seen as gambling. Presbyterian Church, the Baptist Church, etc. Some of the faith-based charities cannot apply for lottery funding. And there is a view that the dormant account money was released, and it's a finite amount, of course. It's only going to arise and then it'll go because spotted all the dormant accounts and the money has been released. It's unlikely there's going to be a large tranche of money coming in the future because unless people open more.
The question I think you're asking, there are choices, I suppose, and what are the best choices to make. Now, one could use the dormant accounts as an evergreen fund, but only making the loans that it would make available available to particular types of organisations. But no lender could sustainably operate a fund on an evergreen basis by limiting who might apply to it. Our view would be that the dormant account should be open to all types of not-for-profit organisations in order to achieve the maximum social impact. Your alternatives are to do things like to use the dormant accounts purely for grant aid, but the money will deplete much more quickly then, and you won't have the opportunity to support the development of a more sustainable and resilient sector. So I think dormant accounts absolutely need to be open to those that don't receive lottery funding. The question of whether there need to be funds available for those that don't take lottery funding from other sources isn't one that I'd be equipped to answer.
You should be a QC because you head off my questions at the pass even before I ask them. So I hope you're being paid the same as a QC. Yes, and you've already made that. But would there be, and my understanding is that it was Sammy Wilson, the then Finance Minister, who adopted this idea to meet the needs of a large proportion of charitable groups in Northern Ireland that can't, for various reasons, apply for lottery funding. And I accept your point that it might be very difficult to operate as a loan or grant-making body if, at the end of the day, you restricted your cadre of potential investors down to such a small group. But would there be a potential for having priority to be given to those groups who, over this last 22 years, have not had access to lottery funding in any shape or form?
I think I'd approach that in a different way. And I remember at the time that when the dormant accounts provision was to be implemented in Northern Ireland, it was to be as a loan fund, but restricted to faith and youth, which we had no view in that at the time. But in hindsight, you can see that would be narrow. I think I'd approach that in a different way and say that it's important that the concept of resilience and investment readiness and enterprise be targeted right across the voluntary and community sector. And if particular types of organisations need specialist support with that, be they faith-based organisations in particular, then I think it would be appropriate that interventions are targeted at those to help them develop their business models, to achieve their social impact, and access all of the range of funding that may be available to them. So I think support may well be needed.
You don't see any potential for criteria which say that all things being equal, priority would be given to the group that for the last 22 years had not access to the vast pot of money that was available through, I mean, literally over £1 billion has been made available to good causes in Northern Ireland through the lottery, and yet there's a significant number of groups who could never access one penny of that. Should they not be given some priority when it comes to either lending or grant aiding the dormant accounts?
I have no strong view in that, but from my own experience of grant making in particular, the key thing isn't the organisational structure as long as it's not for profit, it's the social impact that's proposed and whether it's a good project and whether the governance is correct. You could get into all sorts of problems as a grant maker if you decided to select one type of organisation over another on some sort of ethical issues. That's maybe not the most satisfactory answer, but
unless there was some legislative basis for you to enable you to make that decision, it strikes me that the media might be concerned if this finite pot of money is allocated to groups and then suddenly we discover that they've had £5 million worth of grant aid already from the lottery, and other groups that have been denied that opportunity are at the bottom of the queue or lose out.
I think that it would be more attractive to the public and others if we can say that the 7 odd million in dormant accounts in Northern Ireland turned into a sustainable fund that wasn't finite through innovation and flexibility in being able to achieve impact again and again through being an evergreen fund. And I think that would be more attractive in the longer term. Those organisations that are achieving social impact, there is a need for grant aid for them. It's maybe up to others to identify, well, what's the most appropriate forms.
Okay, thanks. Martin?
Thank you, Deputy Chair. Mr Wells is fighting a rearguard battle in this one, but I think it will be very difficult for us to introduce legislation which discriminates in favour of one sector and against other sectors. But I do think that the work that groups do in the city is absolutely astonishing, and we certainly should find a way, as you say, to look at groups like the Presbyterian International Meeting Point, Fitzroy, the Common Grounds Cafe and so on, Mornington Trust, the work they're doing and how we can make sure that we give more impact to that and other work as well with the homeless. And I welcome that. I just need some clarification because, and my apologies for missing the very start of the presentation, by evergreen you mean people would repay, so that, okay, so it'll be replenished. But explain to me what Patrick talked about, a hybrid loan grant system, because my understanding is the Community Finance Fund can only do loans. So you're not suggesting they also do grants, are you? You mentioned a hybrid system. What do you mean a hybrid? Well, from this fund.
I was picking up on your briefing 2 weeks ago from the two DFP officials who had talked about that. So I had assumed that they are, having referred to grant loan hybrids, that they did have a source of grant as well.
But then I picked them up wrong. My understanding was, those that have studied it more may know, but my understanding this was only to be loaned. That in fact, when I met the previous minister in this, Simon Hamilton, was very keen that she be introduced as quickly as possible. He was very firm in that such a small fund to start giving out grants would be in his view just inconsequential. I'm not saying he used that word, but he said you wouldn't have the same impact, and therefore he wanted to stick to loans. What I was arguing about that time is any way that the community could add to the fund. But so, Chair, maybe we get the clarification, or Paddy probably knows more about it than me. If the official said it'd be grant loan, then that must be what I have in mind. That certainly wasn't what I thought.
There are experiments, particularly in the north of England, around grant loan models, and essentially you can look at that as almost like an interest rate subsidy. If you provide an organisation with finance that comprises £5,000 grant and £15,000 loan on particular terms, we're getting 20,000. You know, so those models are very innovative. And
I thought that was ruled out in this, so we'll get some clarification. Maybe everybody else under knows that. But the second thing is that you were speaking. Let me get my glasses on. Tiziana, you were speaking about. Cooperatives, of course, and this is a great model, and the Ashton Centre in Belfast started that way with people putting in £1 and so on. But brings me back to the rearguard battle I'm fighting. I would like people to be able to contribute to the new Community Finance Fund. I would like people to be able to say, my wealthy aunt, God bless her, has passed away and left me £1,000. I'd like to give £100 to your community fund, and maybe you'd give me a little share or something. But and part of making it evergreen is trying to find a way for the community and those of goodwill to say, look, we like what you're doing. We'd like to put some more money into this. Is that impossible, or can this model be used for that, to try and augment the fund?
I could explain a little bit how you can. Well, no, the interesting thing there is that at the heart of that potential then is this whole concept of investment readiness. And if we came up with a proper investment readiness programme in Northern Ireland to enable organisations to think about their business models and how they might raise finance, there's no reason to prevent individual citizens from investing in social sector organisations directly. That can be done through community share provision. But there are many examples in GB now, for example, of disability organisations needing to raise finance to provide residential accommodation by issuing their own bonds and being supported to do that through having grant aid to buy the specialist support that's needed. But also then you get a combination of grant makers and the bond issue supporting developments. Tiziana might talk a bit further about the individuals and community shares.
The profile of the investors, usually the investors that I'm talking about are people that is interested in the project.
Yeah.
You know, it's what it does to the community. So even if this project comes from any kind of sector, a faith group-based organization or an environmental kind of, investors do part with their money because they believe that their money can have an impact to their own life, to the well-being of the community they belong to anything that they can actually see and have. And that's why it's so important to have something written down about the project, something written down about the community. So you can do it in those big terms, but how can you actually articulate the benefit to your potential investors is key. So, yeah.
Let me just finish with this, Chair. You see, one of the gaps is still, if I'm in Seattle and I'm part of the Irish or Scots-Irish diaspora.
Which you are often, actually.
I've been in Seattle since 2000, much to my regret.
Oh, how pleased for you.
But if you were in Seattle or Austin or New York or Boston or Toronto and you wanted to contribute to one of the many good funds here, it's difficult for those smaller funds and those who are doing wonderful work to get their message across to their... Whereas if we had, as a government, had one kitty where you can say to those people, look, put your money in here, and it could be a loan, like the kiva.org, you would get your money back. It seems to me that there is a possible way of, it's almost like crowdfunding, but for people around the globe, people of goodwill to say, who don't maybe have $1 million, but who might have $100 to go to the funds. So I'm trying to crack that problem at some stage.
There is an example, a council in England somewhere, I can find more information for your committee, where they've done exactly that. It was actually a local authority initiative, and the community fund that they created was also through citizens participating in that way.
I think what you're asking for is desirable ultimately, but we're on a journey. And for example, it's been a significant innovation in Northern Ireland to develop the Community Benefit Society model, which allows people to directly buy shares in social enterprises that are meeting a community need. But there are other ways in which people directly can invest now in funds that are aimed to achieve social impact. So, you know, you can be a depositor in charity bank.
You can be a saver in charity bank, but in terms of your point, I mean, there's no reason why you couldn't look at a trust model for the Community Finance Fund, which, you know, a well-governed model into which interested parties can invest. And that becomes your mechanism by which to effectively to have the evergreen investment circulating with repayments of interest, forming the capital that then gets loaned out to further organisations.
And I recall initiatives such as the Arts Impact Fund in GB, which is a combination of individual investors, philanthropic money and others, and that makes a combination of grants to some arts organisations but loans at high interest to others that have big repayable capacity, and aims to work in a very sustainable way in doing that.
Well, Chair, I know there's a consultation going to open on this, or has opened, but it'd be nice if Tiziana could come back on that council that you think did that sort of idea to attract in international loans or
Can I also add maybe a profile of the investors that we have experienced since the community share, because it will help you also understand why.
Maybe Patrick could give us a little bit of information on that trust model, and maybe thank you.
Okay, thanks. Leslie, did you want to?
Yes, very, very quickly. Thank you very much. I found that very interesting. My question actually follows on very nicely behind the last speaker. You represent 3 organisations who are at the cold face in this. I'd like to know what your business plan is. How do you intend to move forward? How do you intend to finance? Have you any sort of grandiose plan to grow your respective businesses so in fact that continue to help the whole community? And would ever include having loans itself?
I can answer that one from the perspective of Building Change Trust very easily, because we're a time-limited endowment, so we're on our spend down to go out of business at the end of 2018. So,
no future for you then?
Well, me personally, hopefully. But in terms of Building Change Trust, our aim is to achieve our strategic aims through sustainably through others taking up the mantle for those pieces of work we've commissioned in collaboration and social finance. So we'll be finishing our work by the end of 2018 and going out of business.
No extension then?
Yeah, but the others maybe will answer individually.
Our organisation is a small organisation, and of course the long-term sustainability of cooperative alternatives has always been, on our forehead. So we have on our mind, and for sure we wanted to diversify our income sources. So we have a part of our service are direct sales to people that can buy in our expertise. Some are contracts like with the Building Change Trust. Some others are our membership, because we are a cooperative ourselves, so we are building our membership as well. And some other it's in kind, because we have a voluntary board at this stage, so we don't pay our board members. So yes, it's always we are exploring. We are confident that there is a market need there now, and we think that is what will keep us going.
Charity Bank has plans to grow and is already doing so, as long as we have savers interested in placing their money with an organisation that only generates interest from helping and assisting non-profits. Then we will continue to have a business, and we'll continue to do that. We're a company limited by share. Our shareholders are all charitable foundations. Our biggest shareholder is Big Society Capital, which is the organisation, the wholesale bank, if you like, charged with disbursing the English and Welsh dormant accounts. So we will continue to effectively satisfy the needs of our savers, especially, for example, the credit unions in Northern Ireland, to make sure that we have a way of paying them a fair rate of interest based on the business and the lending we do across the UK.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. That was very stimulating indeed, and there's clearly a lot of potential. It's an interesting fund. So thanks very much for coming in. And if you could follow up on those specific issues that we need more information on around trust and so on. Okay, thanks very much
for your time, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, members, we're going to move on to item 6, and bear with me because I'm not 100% sure what the procedure is. So we're looking at the 3 pieces of subordinate legislation, 3 statutory rules, and the departmental officials are on hand should members have any questions. They can answer any queries. So just at SR, the Public Services Pension Revaluation Prices Order 2016. The details of that are at pages 40 to 47 of your main pack, and this has been laid in the Business Office by DFP for formal consideration by the committee and is subject to draft affirmative resolution procedures. So members, at the meeting on the 17th of February, we considered the initial proposal for subordinate legislation, and you were content with the proposal, and the department has since confirmed that there have been no changes to the policy since we were content with those proposals. So if we are content that the committee has considered statutory rule, the Public Services Pensions Revaluation Prices Order 2016, and recommends that it be affirmed by the Assembly.
Agreed.
Agreed. Okay. Same thing, number 7, SR 2016-50, revaluation regarding earnings order. So this will be subject to negative resolution. And again, on the 17th of February, we were happy then, and it doesn't appear to have changed. The examiner of statutory rules has raised no points about the rule by way of technical scrutiny. And again, officials are present if we do have any questions or Nope. So if members are content that the committee has considered SR 2016-50, the Public Service Pensions Revaluation Earnings Order, Northern Ireland, and has no objections to the rule?
Agreed.
Great. Okay, item 8, Rule 69 regarding automatic telling machines. Again, on the 17th of February, we requested no changes and the examiner has raised no points of rule. So if members are content again that the committee has considered SR 2016-69, the rates automatic telling machines designation of rural areas order Northern Ireland 2016 and has no objection to the rule? Agreed, great. Okay, item 9, correspondence.
Yeah, Chair, I don't think there's any decisions needed required in relation to any of the correspondence, so it's really for noting the DFP response in relation to the LCM on the Northern Ireland Stormont Agreement and Implementation Bill has now been received and that's been forwarded to the WFM DFM Committee, which is dealing with that matter. So aside from that, the rest is for noting.
Okay, is that the whole item? Okay, item 10 then, forward work plan at pages 72 and 73 of our main pack. Are members content that the work programme is updated to reflect the decisions made here today and published on the committee web pages? And just to remind you that as previously agreed, we're going to meet the NCA at 12:30 here, so members have a wee break in between. But if we could come back from
In this room, Chair?
In this room, yep, and there will even be a sandwich. A pound will be deducted from your office costs for every triangle you eat. Do members have any other items of business that they want to raise? Nope. Well then, apart from our NCA meeting, members, the next meeting is back here on the 9th of March at 10 a.m. Thank you.
Northern Ireland Assembly, Committee Room 30.